So recently, Iran launched a massive drone and missile attack on Israel. Do you think this could lead to a full-scale regional war now that they're getting involved?
Well, absolutely. And it was the first time that Iran has launched missiles and drones from their territory, from their country, directly into Israel, which suggests to me they're really pushing the limits, and they have no fear of reprisal, from the United States. And I'm afraid that President Biden has created a little distance between himself and the state of Israel. Our enemies see that, and it basically emboldens them to push the envelope. It's really, really critically important from my standpoint, from my viewpoint, that we stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, show no daylight whatsoever between us. There's all kinds of forces of evil right around Israel, obviously, to their south, obviously to their east, to their north. And then, of course, you got the Houthis shooting in rockets and creating all kinds of mayhem in the Red Sea as well. And all entities are funded by Iran. Hamas is, Hezbollah is, the Houthis are. And a lot of our energy policy here in the United States is contributing to that, given that this administration has taken oil and gas off the table in terms of further exploration in this country for the most part, which is doing nothing but help to keep the price elevated for oil and gas. All that does is to help fund Iran more and Russia as well. So all these things go together, and all are very concerning.
As we both know, President Joe Biden has urged Israel that they're not going to participate in a counterattack with rockets and missiles against Iran. Even though they helped them shoot down a lot of those missiles and drones, they're not going to help them participate in a counterattack. How much will this change the possibility of U.S. intervention in the region?
Well, first of all, you never telegraph to an enemy what you will not do. That's just stupid, quite honestly. And it's a sign of weakness and a sign of appeasement. And it's the exact opposite of what the president should have done, number one. Number two, it's a precarious situation there. And the more this escalates, the more likely we're all in World War III.
Now, in the United States, there's a lot of, well, even worldwide, there's a lot of pro-Hamas supporters. Why is that?
Well, you have folks that have visas to come over here and study, probably some family ties as well. And then you also have refugees over the years that have populated in some of these states, such as Michigan and Minnesota in particular. Obviously, there's a wide cross section of humanity in New York. And I'm not so sure that a number of the protesters out there aren't those who crossed the border illegally over the last 2.5, 3 years, just to create this type of mayhem on our streets in the United States, when these episodes basically give them an avenue to protest.
Meanwhile, in Russia, well, meanwhile in Europe, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is continuing after over 2 years. On both sides, Democrats and Republicans, they're split between the decision of keep on funding Ukraine or not to. What is your intake on this?
Well, I look at it this way. I think we need to take Putin at his word. He wants to go after the Baltic states. He still views those states as part of Mother Russia. We know he'd certainly like to take Moldova. He certainly obviously wants to take Ukraine, thought he was going to be able to do it in about 6, 7 days. Obviously, that effort was repelled. And now they're in a pretty stagnant stalemate. But Ukraine is running out of weapons. Russia has many more people than Ukraine. Russia has a lot more in terms of weaponry. And we need to support Ukraine. They're great freedom fighters. And here's the reason why. Fundamentally, if we allow Putin to take Ukraine and those tanks roll into Kyiv, Ukraine falls, there's no question he's not going to stop there. He's going to go to Moldova. He's going to test the limits in the Baltics. And again, in this scenario, we're basically facing World War III. So isn't it better to enable the Ukrainians, get them the weaponry that they need, which is what the supplementals, that's the intention of the supplemental. It's not cash, it's weaponry that they need. And that's what the supplemental would provide, is that additional weaponry, not only for them, but to stockpile and to replenish our own stockpiles, by the way. So it's really important that we at least help them maintain the stalemate and prevent Putin from taking Ukraine. Because if he takes Ukraine, he's not going to stop there. And we will certainly be on the verge of World War III. And at that point, the 115 billion that we have spent on Ukraine really is for naught, really is wasted. And not only that, if we're in World War III, we're going to be spending a whole lot more money than 113 billion, and we're going to be shedding American blood too. Right now, the Ukrainians are taking it on the chin. They're the ones spilling the blood. They're the ones who are standing up to Putin. And quite frankly, they're doing the whole world a great service. We should be supporting.
How likely is a Russian victory over Ukraine?
It depends upon if we get Ukraine the weaponry they need. If we don't get them the weaponry they need, they fail. That's the bottom line.
Can you tell me more about how a Russian victory would affect NATO and the United States?
Well, if they go in and take Moldova, which we know he wants to do, if they go in and incur on the Baltic states, which we know he wants to do, you're basically in World War III. NATO Section 5 of NATO would be triggered pretty quick. Look, the countries in Eastern Europe that are part of NATO, they remember what it was like under Soviet aggression, under Soviet rule, back in years ago. The wall fell in 1989, but it still lives really strong in their minds because many of them were alive then. They battled it then. I'll never forget when I was over in Germany, where we were training the Ukrainians on military equipment, how to use it. And I asked one of the gentlemen who was U.S. forces, he was Army, I believe. And I asked him, I said, what's the age range of the individual from Ukraine that comes here to be trained? And he said, well, it depends. He said anywhere from age 17, 18 to last week, we had a grandfather who was 73 years old come in and said he wanted to be trained how to use a Bradley tank. And he told us, paraphrasing here, that he lived under Soviet rule and he didn't want his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to have to live that way. I think that speaks volumes.
There's a lot of Americans who do not want anything, they don't want anything to do with what's happening overseas. Tell us why they should care. We're already facing our own problems with inflation, high cost of living, gas prices. Why should Americans care what's going on overseas?
Well, you either fight your enemy overseas or you end up fighting them at home. We experienced this in World War I and World War II in particular. As Winston Churchill once said, the American people will always do what is right, but only after we exhaust every other available option. In other words, generally speaking, it takes a little while for the American public to come around and recognize that we have a responsibility here. And the fact of the matter is, if Europe is on fire under NATO, Section 5 of NATO, we're automatically in the war as well. That was put there for a reason, because in the prelude to World War II, when Germany was on the march, everybody sat back and said, oh, it's not us. Well, then it became us. And, so NATO was put in place basically to ensure that that would never happen again. And every entity, every organization, has its pros and its cons, its pluses and its minuses. But on the whole, NATO has served the world very, very well and kept us out of World War.
Another huge issue on our own country is the crisis at the border. What is the current situation looking like, and why is it a necessity to secure it?
Well, it is a necessity to secure it. The problem is the president, who occupies the White House, doesn't care about securing it. And this is an enforcement issue. It's an execution of the law issue. The law is on the books. Uh, there's plenty of statute that gives the president all the authority in the world to clamp down on the border. President Trump took that seriously, put in place policies that strongly supported the border and border patrol, enforced the border, and really drove down illegal entry into the country substantially over a period of time. Well, President Biden came into office. He repealed every single policy that Trump had in place to enforce the border, and adopted this open border policy that, at least to his credit, he and the Democrats campaigned on. So they weren't. It wasn't a sleight of hand in any way. They told everybody, we're for open borders, and if we get elected, we're going to open the border. Well, that's what he did. But you not only have people who are seeking and eligible for asylum coming across, you have the criminal cartels, drug cartels, so many bad people with malintent for the country coming across. That's the problem. There's a number of gotaways, and there's a tremendous number folks that we don't even know that are here because they were never even detected, when they cross the border. This has been a great bonanza for the drug cartels, making them billions. Fentanyl is flooding into all of our communities. And I have to say, it's the most frustrating issue that members of Congress face because it's an issue of enforcing the law. It's not an issue of legislating the law. And we could add policies of President Trump to the statute. But if you have an administration that is not going to enforce the law that is on the books, there's really no counterbalance to that. Even the Supreme Court, when they have ruled that this administration needs to remain in Mexico, for example, they ignored it. And so our system of government does not work very well when you have people who are either incompetent or corrupt in office. And this president, he'll look you in the eye and say with a straight face that he needs extra tools to secure the border. And that's just not true. He doesn't need any extra tools. All he has to do is go back and look at everything that he rescinded policy-wise through his executive orders and reinstate them. And that would help to secure the border again. So it's a very frustrating issue for every member of Congress. We don't have the ability to execute or enforce the law. The only ability we have constitutionally is to write the law. But there's no problem with the law. Statute is very clear.
I remember at your fundraiser, you mentioned at the southern border, this is a very easy way for enemy nations to spy on us just through the southern border. How much of a threat is that?
Tremendous. There are plenty of Chinese nationals that have crossed. There are plenty of Iranian nationals that have crossed, many of them military age. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they're just not waiting on the signal from their home countries to do, whatever they have planned to do, which is not going to be pretty. I suspect there's terrorist attacks in the works. And by the way, our FBI does a tremendous job of tracking down our other agencies as well. They do a tremendous job of tracking down potential threats and fooling a lot of these threats. And there's a reason why we've not had an attack on the homeland since 9/11, 2001. And it's because of the authorities that were put in place by Congress post 9/11 to address potential threats. And we have a lot, folks should know, we have a lot of really good patriotic men and women who work in these agencies who are working day and night to keep Americans safe.
What will the future of our country look like with the other nationwide issues we're facing, such as well, the threat of communist China, our debt. Our debt is we're trillions of dollars in debt, and the political extremism on both sides. We're so politically divided. How are those three issues going to affect the future of our country if these continue?
Yeah, well, China and the debt are two long-term threats, to the country for sure. Very significant threats. China wants to be the dominating country in the world economically and militarily. They're a communist nation. Chinese people are wonderful people, but unfortunately, they are governed by communists who care nothing about human rights or human dignity or life. They're focused on absolute power and tyranny. And for a long time, a lot of people in this country said, we need to be doing trade with China, 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 China. Well, now a lot of people are realizing that all we did was take a little dragon and turn it into a big dragon. And we have to contend with that. And so policies are beginning to change. We have a select committee in Congress focused on all things related to China that's made a number of different recommendations to the authorizing committees, and the House of Representatives has pursued a lot of those. And we continue to pursue a lot of those. TikTok is a good example. There are a lot of young people that utilize TikTok, but what they don't realize is that China is collecting all that data. The Chinese Communist Party is collecting all that data on them, and which could be used against them, later. And so it's a real issue on the financial front, on the debt front. Really, it's entitlement spending that drives the debt. Entitlement spending constitutes, if you include interest on the debt, it constitutes about 73, 74% of the total budget. The other 25, 26% of the budget is what's known as discretionary spending. And that's what Congress votes on every year, the 12 annual appropriations bills. Currently, about half of that 26% is for the military. And about half of the military funding is for pay and benefits. And a lot of the pay is still really low for our military. A lot of our military, unfortunately and unbelievably, is still eligible for food stamps or SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. What a lot of people know as food stamps, and that's not good. So we still have a lot of work to do to rebuild our military and to have the technological capability that we need to fight all these threats around the world and deter our adversaries. But this president and his weak foreign policy is making that harder and harder by the day. But what's driving the debt is entitlement spending. The three biggest entitlement programs are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And long term, those are the programs that are growing the fastest. And in the case of Social Security, currently you have more Social Security receipts coming in than expenditures. But it won't be too long before that math changes, 8 years, and everybody will be taking about a 25% cut that's on Social Security. Most people don't realize that. And so that doesn't mean Congress has to cut Social Security benefits for those that are, if we were to act now, for those that are on it. But the program does need to be modified, long term to keep it sustainable. So it's there and available for those who need it, when they retire, which is everybody, obviously, who's paid into it. Medicare is another big driver of the debt, largely because of demographics. You have a lot of individuals that are retirement age now, eligible for Medicare, and then the ever increasing cost of healthcare drives those numbers as well. And that's a harder one to tackle than Social Security. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, you have the Social Security Trust Fund, that money is there. It's not there. It basically is invested in U.S. Treasuries. In other words, that money that comes in through the payroll tax for Social Security and for Medicare is used and spent on everything else. And so it's not like it's being socked away. Mathematically, you have more receipts coming in than you have expenditures going out. But again, in about 6 years or so, that math will change. And at that point, under the statute, people will be forced to take a cut. So it gets a little complicated, but the bottom line is it's not like a savings account like it should be, or an investment account like it should be. Every dime that goes in is basically spent on other things.
And with political, not just extremism, but we're just so politically divided. Is is there any chance of that ever changing in the future, back how it used to be, especially back in your day? Or no, is it just going to get worse over time?
Well, there's been a lot of divisions over the course of the country's history, and of course, the most notable, obviously, was the Civil War, the division over slavery. I don't think we're going to have a civil war, anytime soon in this country. But I do think, and I am concerned that the civil discourse has gotten to a point where it's destructive, not constructive, and we need to work on that. There are a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions, and on most things, 80% of the people of this country, I'd say, would probably agree on most things. Social media and the news media in particular is all driven based on ratings. How do you drive ratings? You pit one person against the other person. It's the same reason why people like to stop and watch the fight on the playground, or like to rubberneck on the road, when there's an accident. Those things, for whatever reason, are compelling, to human nature. And the cable TV shows are all driven based on ratings. News today is all driven based on ratings. And I think that's really, and social media in particular, really escalates the temperature on a lot of this stuff.